Welcome to the Shift Network series on growing your own herbal medicine. My name's Chanchal Cabrera, and this is Innisfree Farm and Botanic Garden on the west coast of British Columbia, Vancouver Island. It's actually raining, so I am in my winter coat. We're going to do an exercise that would be preferably done outdoors, but if it's raining, you might be able to accommodate by sitting as I am on a porch or in a doorway looking out, or perhaps under a big tree, even under a big umbrella. But getting up close to a plant is our exercise today. So let me introduce our series a little bit. We're going to be very practical, we're going to be very pragmatic, we're going to look at useful, applicable information for making the best medicine. So that means growing the plants, harvesting the plants, processing them, drying them and then processing them, and storing them, and then how to manage the plants, the medicines, once they're in the dispensary. So that's our work for the next few weeks together. That's our series. We'll be in the gardens a lot. We'll be in the apothecary garden, we'll be in the flower garden, we'll be in the greenhouse. We'll look at soils, we'll look at integrated pest management, how we've dealt with some unpleasant visitors in our greenhouse recently, and all of that will be very practical. We'll also be talking about constituents and about solvents and the best way to extract things. So you're going to get all the tips and tricks of a practicing herbalist. So a lot of us go to classes and we learn about herbs for the immune system or herbs for the lungs, and it's very exciting and it's very useful. But we don't always know where those medicines came from or what it takes to make them a good medicine. And that's what we're going to explore in this series. So it's for the serious lay herbalist, and it's also for the practitioner who wants to get more skills in the dispensary and knowing the medicines they work with. So a backstage look, if you like, at how it all works, at what a herbalist does when they're not in the clinic, what else a herbalist does, what other kinds of work is involved. So before we begin, before we get stuck into all those facts and data and information about plants, let's just take a step back and introduce maybe what you could call the stars of the show, the plants themselves. Let's get to know our plants. So there are many ways to define a herb. If you are a botanist, then a herb is anything that is herbaceous, that is dies back in the winter, leaving nothing above ground. Well, a perennial, but it dies back. So a tree or a shrub, of course, is perennial, but is not dying back. They're not herbaceous. In culinary terms, a herb is something that you add to your food for flavor and actually for medicine, although not everybody realizes that, but those aromatic flavors that we put in are mostly antimicrobial and have their own healing properties. You're bringing medicine into your food there with your herbs. But of course, to a herbalist, a herb is the medicine that we use. It might be a root, it might be a bark, it might be a leaf or a flower or a seed. If you practice Chinese medicine, then herbs in that context actually might even include some animal parts, insects, and so on. But to a Western herbalist, it's any part of a plant that could be a medicine, even the resins that are extracted, and of course the volatile oils or essential oils are, they're all herbal medicines to a herbalist. So an interesting question then is, how do we know as herbalists how to use plants? How do we know where they come from, what they're for, what the medicine is, how to use them safely? A big question. If you ask indigenous peoples how they know, they will say that their ancestors knew and passed the message along, the oral tradition. But how do the ancestors know? And when you go back that far, when you go back in history, what you find is that the ancestors knew about the plants because the plants told them. The plants spoke to them. At least that's how they say it today. When asked how the medicines are known, indigenous peoples often say that the plants speak. So we would love to be able to hear the plants. And as herbalists, that's perhaps a peak experience. So that's our exercise today. We're going to spend just a few minutes doing that, actually listening to the plants. Those people in ancient times who could hear the plants like that were living very close to the land. They lived in harmony with the seasons, they followed the animals, they followed the plants around as the seasons changed and the flora and fauna changed accordingly. So the people were very in tune with the natural world. And obviously that's something that we're very far away from today. So yes, I have a beautiful backdrop of flowers, but of course I'm not really living any kind of natural life in the real sense. So there is a real pathology on the planet of that separation from nature. I wrote about that 15 years ago in the fibromyalgia book, which we are offering a bonus download of the DVD about in this series as a gift for you. In that book, I wrote about separation from nature as the primary pathology on the planet, and how that underpins everything that's gone wrong, if you like, with society and culture and health, that we're so far away from nature we don't know how to eat or sleep in natural rhythms. That actually has a name now. That's called nature deprivation disorder. Nature deprivation disorder. That term was coined by Richard Louv in a book called Last Child in the Wood. And he wrote about how being urbanized and isolated from nature has created immense pathologies on a psychic level as well as on a physical and emotional level. So how do we reconnect? How do we as herbalists practice that listening to the plants, that deep connection to plants that is inherent to us, that is imbued into us by the very fact that we share our DNA with plants, that we share our metabolism and physiology with plants. We are part of that plant world. How do we reconnect to that plant world? How do we go back there and hear them? That's the exercise that we're going to do today. So how do we reconnect? How do we listen to the plants, and how do we hear them? The first thing to do is to slow down. Plants live in a very slow motion world. They do move. Of course, they move in the breeze, and they move by seed dispersal and suckers and runners through the ground. But in principle, a plant doesn't really move. So for us to listen to them, we need to meet them on their own terms. That means we need to slow down. We also need to be quiet. In order to hear a plant, you have to tune out all the mind chatter and all the background noise. And if there's an airplane or a car or the neighbor's lawnmower, hopefully you can just tune it out as you're listening to your plant and being with your plant. You're coming back into that quiet place that they inhabit, where they simply exist with whatever else is happening in the environment, observing, even participating, but not being attached. It's just like some of the Buddhist or other meditation practices where you watch those thoughts arise and you let them go. When you sit with a plant, your busy brain will kick in and you'll want to name it and figure out what family it is and start analyzing it in various ways and bringing value judgments even. Oh, isn't that pretty? Or that's not a very nice plant. And I'm suggesting to you that if you do that, you won't hear what the plant has to say. So it's about dropping all of that. It's about dropping all the chatter and just listening to what comes through.